Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. This season, we are talking with leaders inside organizations focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking with them about best practices and proven tools for positive change. We are also sharing vignettes from our new book, Allyship in Action, to help leaders take real, tangible action on DEI right away. This work is important because all humans need to feel seen, heard, and belonging. Welcome back, listeners. We have a special bonus episode, a wonderful, wonderful book. I had the chance to read and interview one of the co-authors, Dr. Laurie Weingart, and she specializes in collaboration, conflict, and negotiation with a focus on how differences across people both help and hinder effective problem solving and dispute resolution. She's served on the CMU's interim provost and chief academic officer, as well as senior associate dean of education, and here at the Accelerate Leadership Center at CMU's Tepper School of Business. She is also the professor of organizational behavior and theory and director of collaboration and conflict research lab at Carnegie Mellon University. 10 years ago, economist Linda Babcock sent out a plea to her female colleagues. Like herself, they were crushed by taking on too many tasks and saw that they were trailing behind their male counterparts. They met at a restaurant to share stories and vowed to say no to requests that pulled them away from the work that mattered most. And that was the beginning of the No Club, which is the title of the new book. And this book shows, while strides have absolutely been made for women's equality in the workplace, the battle is not yet won. As this newly researched obstacle makes it clear, the non-promotable tasks, we'll talk about these, the NPTs, are disproportionately assigned to women, creating advancement obstacles that are not prevalent for men. And they did a ton of research on this topic. So this interview is going to focus on why unrewarded work often falls on the shoulders of women, how organizational currency creates NPTs at companies, non-promotable tasks, how organizations must change to distribute the workload, and how culture and management contribute to these in actionable ways. We're going to talk a lot about actionable ways and ideas. Thank you so much for joining Dr. Laurie Weingart. Welcome.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, Laurie, let's start with the term NPTs and your story of how you got to meet this wonderful group of women. Tell us what they are and how the story of how you decided to write this wonderful book about it.
Sure. Like you pointed out, about 12 years ago, Linda Babcock sent an email to the rest of us saying that her work life was out of control. And she imagined that the rest of us were having the same experience, given we were all successful women in our own careers. But she saw us running around just as much as she was. So we got together, in a local restaurant over a $10 bottle of wine and started talking about our experiences, at work. We were going from meeting to meeting. We were serving on committees. We were working with our junior colleagues and mentoring and doing everything that we could and everything that we were asked to do. And in addition to all the work that we were supposed to do as a professor in terms of our research and our teaching, and our lives were out of control. So we sat around and we were actually, we called ourselves in the beginning, the I Just Can't Say No Club. We evolved into the No Club over time as we started realizing that first, we needed to figure out how to navigate the situation of being asked to do so many different things. And then finally, coming to the realization that we were being asked to do many more things than our male colleagues were. And this was really putting us in a difficult situation. So that's what led us to do the research to try and figure out, why are women taking on these tasks? Why are they being asked to do these to a greater extent than their male colleagues? And that, what can we do to fix the problem?
Yeah. Well, and it's so relevant because, this book is packed with data, as good academics you would suspect to be the case. But I remember reading the stat from McKinsey's Women in the Workplace report last fall. And you do such a great job of highlighting this. Companies are saying that DEI is important, but they're not, it falls into this non-promotable task category. And I love how you outlined what NPTs are, that, it doesn't advance the company's, it doesn't get compensated for.
Right.
Rather, it's not visible. So people usually don't even know you're doing it. And anyone can do it. It's not something that's really highly skilled thing that's people specialize in usually. How else would you define NPTs to somebody that maybe is newer to this concept, Laurie?
Sure. Right. So the first thing to look for is this task part of your performance evaluation? Is it something that matters to your pay or advancement? When the push comes to shove, where does it fall in the priority list of what's important to your organization? And this is what we think about in terms of the term you mentioned earlier, organizational currency, right? Every organization has a mission. They have a bottom line they're trying to accomplish, improve, and achieve. And there are parts of your job that contribute to the advancement of the organization's bottom line or mission. And there are parts of your job that don't. So, if you worked at a zoo, your activities that improve the experience for visitors to the zoo, the welfare of the animals, the preservation of species, those are all promotable tasks. Those are things that are highly aligned with the mission of the zoo. But hiring new, I will say zookeepers, but hiring new concession workers, if you're not part of HR, is not part of your job. It's not something that they're going to reinforce. So in thinking about the things that you do in a day-to-day, look at those activities that are directly aligned with your job versus those that don't. So, some examples. There's all these things we do that help other people. They're really important to the organization, right? And they're really important to the culture of your work group, but they help others. They don't necessarily help yourself. So you fill in when somebody's sick, or you cover for them in a presentation, or you teach them how to use PowerPoint, or you proofread one of their documents for them. These are all really important supportive behavior. We often call them like organizational citizenship behaviors, but they're not something that's going to lead to your advancement. So that's one example. Another, big category is the things we do to help the organization, not just help other people. So we might plan events, or a birthday party, a retirement party. We might serve on an oversight committee or help with recruiting. These are things that help the organization, not necessarily one individual, but they're not promotable for you.
Yep. Yeah. As I was scrolling through the list in the book, it basically summed up my 12 years in corporate America. Like, logistical planning and special events, safety committee. I literally led a safety committee. Now, it was a little bit part of my job as the safety coordinator, but still, like, all these volunteer social organizations that I would lead up or be volunteered, told to do.
Voluntold, right.
Yeah. And I thought, this is really fun. I'll do this. And usually, just like the book outlines, I did that in nights and weekends on my quote unquote free time, because I still had to get all my work done. And I rarely got time freed up to do these extra things that, by the way, does bring value to the organization. I mean, employee engagement is tied to a lot of these activities, and women are carrying the brunt of that work. I know in the book, again, you cite just how pervasive this problem is, and the likelihood of women being asked to do these tasks or volunteering to do these tasks, and rather put the ownership on women to fix this problem, the recognition that it's a systemic problem. And I'd love, Laurie, if you could just expand on that. How did we get here? Like, what are the systems in place that create the conditions for women to take on so much more of this non-promotable work?
So there's two answers to the question, I think. So one is when we think about systems, we think about, or lack of systems, we look at the process we use to dole out these tasks, right? So we often rely on volunteers, as you point out, right? Or people get quote unquote voluntold. So these tasks aren't part of anyone's job. And so they kind of fall through the cracks, and we need to get these tasks done. So we look for someone to volunteer, or we ask for a volunteer, or we ask someone to do it as a favor. And in the end, the distribution process is one that relies on, who comes to mind most easily? Who do we think of? Who are we going to ask? Who's done it before? So it becomes more of a process that, quote unquote, we would think it would be random, but it's actually not random. If it was random, everybody would be doing these equally. If we would just say, oh, today I'll ask Joe, tomorrow I'll ask Julie, then we wouldn't have this problem. But what happens is, and what we've learned from our own research, is that we have these stereotypes and expectations that women are the ones who could or should be doing this work, that somehow women are better suited to do the work. Maybe, we think, well, women are the helpers, we're more communal. And some of that may be true, but the issue, of course, is that it doesn't make us any better at doing this work. The work, by definition, doesn't require specialized skills. Anyone can learn how to onboard new employees or organize a meeting or serve on a committee. But when we think of women as being better suited because of a stereotype, we just tend to turn to them. And then it gets reinforced because women recognizing that the expectation is for them to do this work, it makes it very difficult to say no.
Yeah, and then it speaks to the systemic issues, like you said, it gets reinforced, this
Right.
belief and the social pressure. And I remember the times when I did say no. It's like, oh, Julie said no. It was appalling, like people were offended. And then you feel bad and you usually just cave into it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's women face these expectations much more than men do, right? And so it's not surprising that when we get asked to do these things and we say no, it comes as a surprise to other people because we're violating an expectation. And then at the same time, like in your example, you internalize it. You say, well, I really should be saying yes to this. Boy, do I feel guilty that I'm saying no. And we may say yes to avoid the guilt, or we carry this guilt around with us that is placed on us by this systemic kind of expectation that we should be doing this work.
Yep. I think it reminds me of just the work that I do sometimes with gender socialization, just how we're socialized from the time we're little bitty of what's acceptable for girls and boys. And I see it, with my 8-year-old, and I'm going to see it with my 1.5-year-old. Unfortunately, times haven't changed that significantly. Girls are encouraged to please others, to collaborate, to solve problems, to be helpful for others, where a lot of times boys don't receive that same priming. And so you fast forward to the workplace, and no wonder we have these issues where not only are women not being paid, compensated fairly for the amount of work they're doing, but they're experiencing high rates of burnout. And an exodus from the workforce. So I know y'all started writing this book a few years ago, but gosh, how timely is it to what we've seen with the Great Resignation, and especially the withdrawal of women from the workforce? I mean, this is a problem that society really needs to get a good handle on understanding.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research, that McKinsey report, lean-in report that you referred to earlier. There's a even more recent report by Deloitte looking at all the reasons women leave the workforce. And of course, one of the major reasons are burnout and lack of opportunity to advance. And if these are the primary drivers, think about the role of non-promotable tasks. If women are doing 200 more hours a year of non-promotable work than their male colleagues, this drives out the time they have to do the promotable work, right? So it drives out opportunity. And of course, it leads to burnout because, like your example of doing this work on weekends and in evenings, you're going to burn out more quickly because you're working longer hours. And this is work that's not advancing your career.
Yeah.
So it's one thing when we work the extra hours on things that are going to get us recognized, but this is not.
Nope. And it's not gonna behoove the organization too. It's not gonna really help.
It's very costly to organizations, especially now when we have such a labor shortage.
Yep.
It's a primary issue, and all organizations are facing what retention issues and trying to think more inclusively about what retention means and how do we think about our relationship with our employees.
Absolutely. Very timely topic. If you want to get more out of your workforce, you want access to the best, most diverse and inclusive talent, like get better at looking at what NPTs might be at your organization. And really, I think bringing awareness to it. I think what this book does is brings awareness to an issue that I think a lot of individual women feel like they face alone. I know in comparing notes, just last night, I had a conversation with my MBA friends from, we graduated, 12 years ago. And so they're pretty far along in their careers and have important, VP type titles. And what they're sharing with me that's happening to them is exactly what you've described here. I'm being asked to lead up this extra thing. I'm being asked to do this. My male counterparts are not. I'm exhausted. I need more free time. I'm willing to actually trade jobs so that with less money, so that I can have more flexibility. I mean, these are real issues affecting really talented people. And so I think organizations really thinking about this as a competitive advantage to get smart about this and to create a more inclusive workplace where work is evenly distributed, as you all argue in the book. I'm curious, Laurie, I want to dive into like what organizations can do, because one of my pet peeves is we ask women to fix the women's problem a lot, and Lean In was great for its time, but conversations evolved significantly in the last, 1 to 2 decades. I'm curious if it is an individual woman though listening, thinking, oh yeah, I've got a lot of these non-promotable tasks. I have no idea how to say no. I love some of the really clever ideas and frameworks and sayings y'all provided in the book as well. So if we have somebody, maybe this is a bit me, myself, that doesn't feel comfortable saying no, what would you offer to those listeners?
The best piece of advice I can give anyone is to think about 2 things. One is respecting your own time as much as you respect other people's time. So that means when you're making your assessment of what you will or will not say yes to, or will or will not say no to, add that into the equation. How much time do you have? How should you be spending your time? And what type of adjustments will you have to make in order to add this into your portfolio of work? We often think about a request as a one-off, when actually it fits into this broader set of all the things we do day to day. So, it's kind of a combination of assessing your current situation, how you spend your time, and thinking about your work-work balance, your promotable versus non-promotable work, and making sure that it's where it should be in comparison to your colleagues, that you're doing the same amount, especially in comparison to your male colleagues, and then making any adjustments you can in order to get your work back in balance. So that's one thing. The other is recognizing that when you say no to something, there's ways to do it in more constructive ways that can help you avoid backlash. So we talk other people. So William Ury, who's a great writer on negotiation, talks about the power of a positive no and this yes, no, yes strategy, where you say yes to yourself in terms of what are your goals and your aspirations and how you want to spend your time. You may say no to the request as it's being asked of you, but saying yes to the person in a way to discover and uncover what their underlying interests are, what they really need, and finding a way to help them solve their problem without you taking on the burden of the task.
One of my favorite phrases in the book is no is a complete sentence. So many women will say no. And let me tell you all the reasons why. It's like we just set the tone for someone to manipulate or negotiate with us. It's okay to just say no.
It is okay. And that was one of the very first things we learned, and especially in email, it makes it a lot easier, is just to reply with no, I'm really sorry, I'm unable to do this at this time. And then we were shocked when we got a response that said, oh, I understand you're really busy. Thanks for considering my request. And we like, wow, that was easy. So for some requests, we could do that. Usually it wasn't a request that came from our boss, but it was requests that came from a peer or someone outside of work. There are other situations where you do need to provide some sort of a justification, but you want to avoid over justifying, so the other, people who ask don't want to hear about all the difficulties you're facing, but they certainly want to understand. It helps to let them understand how this fits into all the other things you're doing, because most people don't know.
Laurie, thanks so much for sharing this expertise with us. I can relate so many times when I get an email request, to speak for free or to do something special for a client. And you're like, oh, I think the power dynamic is important. Like you said, if it's somebody that is in a position that has power over you, whether that's a boss, a client, I think it becomes a little harder for me to say no. I try to reframe with them and set the expectation proactively from the start. So I can identify with that, but I think also just a very clear boundary is what that's reminding me of what a yes is and what a no is, and like drawing that line and being okay with the repercussions of that. I do think the more women model that, the more other women will feel psychologically safe to do so as well. And men, I find in this work, especially white men, they don't know what they don't know. And so they'll say like, I didn't know this was a thing. Thanks for letting me know. Or just yesterday, a couple that I know is really inclusive, very focused on, gender equity and larger, anti-racism, and just very passionate about this. I was just at my daughter's soccer game yesterday, and the woman comes up to me and she says, oh, I got to do the concession stand. I'm going to miss the girls' game. And my husband, he said he just wasn't good at doing concession stand work. She's like, well, I'm not good at it either. That's not the point. The point is that we need to share these responsibilities together. So we have a 2-hour shift. So I'm going to do 1 hour. He's going to do 1 hour. And that's that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fallback strategy of men being able to say, well, I'm just not good at this, is really a way of saying you've done it before, so you should do it again. Of course, practice makes perfect, and you don't need to be perfect on many of these tasks. So it just takes a few minutes to give people the experience they need in many of these tasks to pick it up. And if it takes a little bit more time, then there's always the strategy of saying, I'm happy to work with Joe this year so he can learn, what it takes to put on this event so he can do it next year.
Yeah, exactly. I love the practice makes perfect. Now's the perfect time to learn.
That's right.
One of my allies, Karen Catlin, uses that phrase quite a bit. She's used it for many years. And I love when you say that. Something like note taking, for example, that we know tends to be a very gendered task, as somebody that was often asked to do that. Oh, your handwriting's really nice. It's like, that's not the point here. The point is, if I'm taking notes, I'm not participating in the conversation as much. And it's kind of not, it's again, not a promotable task. I don't usually get promoted for my note-taking capabilities.
Exactly. And if note-taking is critical in a meeting, then there's simple solutions. Rotate it, choose someone randomly without replacement, or have someone in the meeting who's more of an administrative assistant whose job it is to take accurate notes.
Yeah, exactly. I love that outline. I love the taking turns, random assignment, being really strategic about people's skill sets and lining it up. I really like that because it takes it more objective versus subjective. Training folks to do it, having allies intervene. folks that can help you if you don't feel comfortable surfacing that yourself. So some really great strategies in the book. I do want to spend some time, Laurie, unpacking some of the things organizations can do, because of course, women you can absolutely take action on this. What's really nice in the book is there's kind of a template to work through your NPTs and identify which ones might be problematic, how much time you're spending, strategies to, shift back some of that work and share it equitably. But for organizations, I'm thinking for people leaders, for folks that really care about inclusion and want to retain and attract more diverse talent, because we know this is also super intersectional. It's not just gender. It's, as you talk, a collection of stories across all dimensions of diversity, underrepresented folks are more likely to get these tasks. I wonder, Laurie, what are some of the things organizations can do to address this on a more systemic level?
Sure. Yeah, there's two, levels at which organizations can come at the problem. The one is, as you mentioned, kind of systems. If we think about how we design jobs, and if we think about what we reward and how we distribute work, all of those things are touch points for fixing the problem. So if we want to think about let's start with the allocation of work. Putting processes in place and making them normative, again, to avoid volunteers, to make sure tasks are aligned with the right positions, to redistribute work, maybe do an assessment of who's doing what in terms of non-promotables in order to get a better understanding. So the first line of attack is just to get people to understand what are non-promotable tasks. Have that conversation in the firm, have people do assessments of their work, managers do assessment of tasks to get a sense of what's promotable and not promotable, and make sure that that's what the organization wants to promote based upon. Once you have a sense of that, it's an easy next step then to start asking people to look at how they're spending their time on promotable and non-promotable work, and get a sense of the balance between men and women and across their employees, and then do a little bit of redistribution. So that can be done a little bit more locally. Then if we think globally about job design, about compensation systems and so on, those can be broader scale interventions, but they're not necessary as a first step into the problem, right? We can make local change. Managers can really have an impact by changing how they distribute tasks. Training up more people to take on non-promotable work, educating employees about what's promotable and what's not promotable, and then doing a little bit of redistribution and reassigning so that everyone's carrying their fair share of the burden. This will give more opportunities for the women to take on the more promotable work, and will, creates a culture of equity, and which is something that's very important to all employees. Once people feel like they're being equitably treated, and as are others, there's less resentment and often more collaboration and congeniality.
Yeah, I think there's the equity piece in the work I do in DEI. I think equity is really daunting for a lot of organizations. Like, whoa, this is like systems, and it's baked in. It's a lot of it's baked into just how we bias, how our brains work on bias around gender and race, and the scripts we learn from a young age. But we bring that into the workplace, and it prevents us from giving equitable opportunities to some folks. And, when I think especially about gender, that performance versus potential bias that's at play, where we're more likely to believe men can do something that they haven't done, right? Where women have to prove themselves over and over again. And this, of course, it affects the other dimensions of diversity too. So you're just not getting the best from your workforce when you're doing that. When you really think about it, this is a win-win for all of us. This isn't a zero-sum game fallacy. There's not, women do less, men have to do more, or vice versa. It's not that's not what you're arguing for in this book. It's, hey, when we all chip in and do things equitably, there's more opportunities for all of us. And I just love that message, right, that we all win together.
Right. If you think about the business case, it's very strong. if you're not effectively using half of your workforce, think about what you're losing out on in terms of performance and productivity, retention, satisfaction, and engagement. Those are all very costly to organizations. So by doing some of these adjustments, which don't require major investment, you're going to be able to have a more satisfied workforce, attract the best talent and retain, your valuable employees. And I think that, there's a fallacy or there's a concern that somehow if the women aren't doing this work, the men are going to have to do more of it and it's going to hold them back. And, what I argue is in many fields where there's an underrepresentation of women, this is where you especially see this, right? When there's an underrepresentation of women. So you have 20% of the women doing, 40 to 50% of the non-promotable tasks, taking a little bit away from the women. There's many men to spread it across. So it's not going to put a large burden on one single individual. It's going to spread out that burden among everybody, and we're all going to be in a better place.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, the retention challenge with labor shortage right now, about a third of someone's annual salary is lost when someone leaves. And so if you can use this as a retention tool for diverse talent, for women that are leaving at higher rates right now because of this issue, I mean, that's just a clear ROI. And I think so much about the book. I mean, you could easily buy this book for key leaders in your organization and have a great lunch and learn conversation. I mean, there's activities in here that are pre-designed for you, so you don't have to, do a lot of work to use this as a tool. But I'm also thinking, Laurie, of organizations, if they could have some women share their stories. I think that's story sharing, just as you collected stories in this book, is so powerful to say, hey, this isn't something that just happened in an academic world. Like this is what happened to Jan on Tuesday,
Right.
Like make it real for people. Because I know in my work, what I do DEI, I work with organizations like it's our industry. That kind of stuff doesn't happen here. There's just this like denial and apathy around it. So frustrating that a good story share can really break down that barrier. So bring the awareness spotlight to your organization, and your employees are experiencing this because we know that it's a much deeper systemic issue that's not just affecting one woman. It's a much broader issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Laurie, it has been fantastic to talk with you today. Thank you for working on this great book. I have followed Linda Babcock's work for quite some time, and I was telling you before we hit record, I got a chance to meet her. It was just one of those like inspirational awe moments for me. So when this book came across, I was just so thrilled to read it and to see the wonderful stories that your team has put together. What a cool read. What an impactful, timely set of tools. Laurie, tell our listeners, how can they get the book? How can they follow your work more?
Absolutely. So the book's available, came out on May 3rd. So very recently. It's available through any major online retailer like Amazon and Barnes & Noble and bookstores and so on. You can also learn more about the book at our website, thenoclub.com, where we just have some basic information about articles that have been covering the work as well, and podcasts like this one, and any additional information. But the best place to go is your online realtor, and you'll be able to find the No Club.
Awesome. thenoclub.com. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes. Laurie, it's been such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.